Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and today I want to talk about balance and kung fu techniques in Wandering Heroes of Ogre, and more generally about balance and powers in general. I've tried to make a few videos of this, and there was an issue with some lawnmower stuff going on in the background, so hopefully we'll be able to do this without too much additional sound. So if not, I'll just put up the one of the other videos that had maybe a little bit more sound, but might have had more content that I'd like to get out there. Anyways, when we made Sartorius, we that's a game about spellcasters and has a lot of magic and spells. And in the core rulebook, we tried to get a lot of parity. We didn't want to go crazy, but the power scale is probably like 4 to 6 for any given spell, and that was by design. And in the process of doing that, some of the spells that maybe initially had a certain, coolness factor to them, we did kind of have to whittle them down a little bit. And in some instances, I think we were a little less satisfied with the final result. So when we put out the Book of the Archon, which is an optional expansion, we figured, hey, let's just go a little bit crazy and not worry about power scale. This is going to be, everything in the book will be between 1 and 10 on the power scale, and we randomized the spell acquisition method for it, but that was only an option. You could still select them if you wanted to. And what we found was whether people were using the random method or the selection method, these spells were just a lot more fun in play than the ones from the core book, at least at our table and in our play tests. And they became enormously popular. Even some of the ones that weren't that powerful became pretty popular. And so I think for us, we realized that sometimes it's okay to not be so focused on balance all the time. And I've sort of gone back and forth on this over the years. So, and I'm sure a lot of other people have, just depending on where you're at and what your experience with the games are at the moment. And sometimes you want more balance, sometimes you want less. So I don't think there's any real perfect answer here, and I certainly don't want to act like there's just one way to do this. I think when it comes to designing games, there's certainly a case to be made for a hefty dose of balance in some instances, and for taking a more sort of shoot from the hip approach. And I think really what's important is to know which one you're doing when you go in, and to not be surprised by an effect down the road. If you put in a power and it's a little bit overpowered from some other abilities in the game, I think it's okay if you realize what you're doing it for a reason. It's it depends. If you don't realize it and it surprises you, that's when it is maybe more of an issue. So that was sort of the lesson that we took from Sartorius. And then when we made Ogre, we certainly wanted some amount of balance, but we didn't want it to be restrictive, and we didn't want it to interfere with the excitement at the table, the fun, and just like I wanted to feel like I was in a martial arts movie where some guy just got his head lopped off, and I didn't want to have this system in place where all we were allowing ourselves to do was have different techniques giving different +1 or +2 bonuses to things. Just assigning them to different areas. I wanted things that had, like spectacular results sometimes. And so you had to allow for certain power spikes. You had to allow for certain techniques being better than others, at least for a given task. And for me, what ended up being the balancer was this notion of the evolving kung fu landscape. And I kind of drew that from a number of things, but I think my main source of inspiration there was how in martial arts or any sport, everything evolves, and it's also sort of from the wuxia genre itself, where you have one guy come into town and he's got this spectacular kicking technique that nobody can defeat, and then somebody else figures out a counter to it. So I was talking about one-armed swordsmen the other day. A perfect example is the Golden Sword School. Their enemy ends up coming up with this hook sword thing that basically defeats the Golden Sword School technique, and they're able to stab them in the side every time. So that's sort of from the wuxia end, that's where that was coming from. But then from like my from my own experience, and just from with other sports too. Like if you're a fan of basketball or football or boxing or any sport like that, you notice over the years the sports will evolve, partly because the training methods evolve, but also something that works in a given year might not work the next year because people figure out a way around it. And so, I saw that in Taekwondo that happened a lot, where the sport evolved drastically over the years. And so the guys who that were at our gym that were maybe competing in the 80s were, the way they would describe it, it was so different from how what it had grown into. And again, part of that was some of the stuff about the sport changing on its own, like the rules, different requirements. At a certain point, they made you wear a helmet, that sort of thing. So those things will naturally also cause it to change. But there was also a clear evolution where, something that was working one year might not work the next. So that's what I really wanted in the Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate game. The sense that right now the book is a snapshot of the kung fu techniques as they exist in the present day of the setting. 10 years from now in your campaign, things might be different. Maybe the best technique in the book right now is one of the worst 10 years from now. And so what that allowed us to do is, it's okay if you have this, this really great technique that lets you cut off people's heads, because down the road some guy's going to come up with a counter that's going to make you really pay for using that technique. And that's sort of, and again, that's why we encourage GMs and players to come up with their own kung fu techniques in the game, because that's sort of part of the progression of the campaign. That's part of what makes it fun. You get defeated by somebody, maybe one of the player characters dies, and the party needs to figure out a way to deal with this guy, and they know how dangerous he is. So that's the that's the kind of excitement and interesting campaign developments we wanted to have. Now, we did put the Kung Fu Technique chapter in the public domain, and we did that for a reason. I realized that's how I like things to be. That's how it works at our table. That's how it worked in playtests. But I know that a lot of different people are going to have different points of view on how the Kung Fu technique should be balanced. And so I figured, well, rather than doing what we did last time, which was we sort of planned, and we didn't ultimately go as far as I thought we would, because circumstances of the company, Sartorius, became something we wanted to shift focus on Ogre Gate. But rather than release Kung Fu expansion books like every few months or something, where we provide like a different way of approaching Kung Fu, or maybe just expand the existing list, I figured, let fans take a crack at it, and maybe they can make some money at it too at the same time. So we put the public domain, we put the Kung Fu Technique chapter into the public domain, so anybody can take that list and completely change them and put them out, like put them up on RPG Now and make money on them, or just put them up on a site or whatever they prefer. I think that's a more interesting approach. I think that if somebody buys the game, they say, well, I like the techniques, but they're really not balanced. I really want something much more, with a lot more parity, a lot more math parity to it. They can easily tweak those things, then put that out, and that's their version of the Kung Fu system. They can add techniques. They can do whatever they want. We'll see how it goes, but I think that's probably better than us just putting one out for people every 6 months. I mean, we might still put out some expansions, but I don't know. I don't think people. I mean, once you get the core book, you get the idea, and I don't think it's really necessary for us to sort of spoon feed people new techniques all the time. We'll be introducing them in modules and things like that, just because naturally they might come up for NPCs and that sort of thing. But I mean, one of the easiest things to do as a GM in this game, in my experience, is make new Kung Fu techniques. And once you start doing that, that's when your signature really starts to get stamped on the campaign. So I really would prefer to encourage people to make their own, to tweak existing ones, and sort of just kind of do it in their own way than rely on us beyond the core book. What I'm hoping to do for supplements this time around is deal mainly with setting supplements and hopefully some adventures. I have an Ogre Gate Inn adventure I'm hoping to release soon after the core book is released, and I'm also considering doing a tournament style module, because I really like, number one, I have a player who's super into tournaments in one of my games, but number two, I think it's a really, it's a really cool way to sort of feature a, like a, it's a great introduction to the genre, and you can do a lot within the scope of a tournament adventure. So we'll see though. I haven't completely decided. I'll also probably look into some demon hunting or ghost hunting adventures as well. But for right now, we're talking about the kung fu techniques and balance. And so really, what I was just trying to say is, the scale is 1 to 10. It's not, and there are chi levels in the game. So a chi level 1 character doesn't have access to chi level 2 techniques. And while that's often an indication of power, it isn't always. Really what it indicates is the complexity of the technique and how difficult it is to master. So you could conceivably have a chi level 6 technique that's not as good as a chi level 3 technique, but just harder to figure out. Generally speaking, they tend to be more powerful as well, but it's just not always the case. And so, again, for me, the thing that I really wanted was fun, excitement. I wanted it to feel like stuff that I would see on the screen, and I didn't want to hamper myself by saying, well, no, this has to just nothing can go past a +2 in this case. That's kind of how we did the original Sartorius book, and I think by the end of it, we were all kind of in agreement that we needed a little bit more room to breathe there. So. So again, that's the approach we took. The evolving nature of the kung fu landscape is what I think really keeps it in check, and in particular, it's the counters. In this game, you have regular techniques, but you also have counters, and so if somebody attacks you and you have a counter that works against it, you can use it, and so that's so when someone walks into the game with the best technique in the book, eventually the GM will have an NPC or somebody else invent a technique that counters it very effectively, and it naturally becomes less useful, in the campaign, and the landscape continues to evolve. So that's sort of the idea. Sort of like your kung fu is going to be different than your granddaddy's kung fu, and different from your son and daughter's kung fu. So that's what I was hoping to achieve with it, and we'll see how it goes. I know everybody's going to have very different opinions on this. I remember. A few years ago, game balance was very much a discussion issue online, and boy, were there different factions and different points of view, and I don't want to come at this like a everybody's wrong but me sort of approach. I really do think this is a style and preference issue, and my own style has changed a lot over the years, and it'll sometimes change depending on what game I'm playing. So really, feel free to weigh in. I'd certainly be interested in people's thoughts on the public domain thing. That's something we're sort of just trying to see, if that's gonna appeal to people, and if that's gonna maybe give fans a tool that'll allow them to get creative and put stuff out there. And I like the idea of people being able to put stuff up on RPG Now. I think that's kind of it's I don't know. What sometimes frustrates me is, you'll have these discussions online about abilities in a game, and it can sometimes be hard to discuss them because the copyright issues. So most companies I think are generally pretty lenient. Gaming companies on the whole in the past decade or so have been pretty laid back, I think, about copyright issues and allowing for for gamers to have the room they need in order to share ideas with each other. But I think this is kind of a new and exciting way to do it. So I will be posting some more of my wuxia inspiration videos, and I'll also plan to put one up on adventure structures in the near future. So until then, have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.